All right. All right. So last week we started in on the series relating to faith as shown in the Psalms. We talked about how often the doctrine of faith is under our consideration from a New Testament standpoint, and we may forget that not only are great examples of faith shown, we kind of keep that in mind because the New Testament. But then again, you're getting that from the New Testament, right? You go into Hebrews 11 and you're thinking about the great Hall of Fame, as we call it, of faith, and all those great Old Testament examples are referenced for us there. So it's even going to the New Testament to point us back to the Old Testament. So we know that, and we see those great examples, but I'm not so much talking about just the examples of faith in the Old Testament, though if it's a true example of faith, that would teach us something about the doctrine of faith, what faith is. By the way, the word doctrine, we talk about the word doctrine related to anything. The doctrine of faith, the doctrine of grace, the doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of heaven, the doctrine of hell, that sort of thing. A doctrine is a word that simply means, and it doesn't matter if you're looking at it in Hebrew language or the idea from Hebrew language, from Greek language, from Latin into English, it doesn't matter. Doctrine just means teaching, okay? It's just a word that means teaching, okay? So the doctrine of faith, what is it? Well, you're going to look at it and see how it operates, and that's how you're going to know what it is. You're going to know it when you see it or hear it. And so certainly we understand we can see that in the Old Testament from some of the greats of faith. But do we ever get beyond that and look at, well, in this case, Psalms? Do we get beyond character studies? Now, David's a great character study, by the way, relating to faith. David's a great character study in various ways. He's called a man after God's own heart. But of course, you think, well, how's a guy called a man after God's own heart if he is in sin with Bathsheba? Just as an example, one of the first things that you might consider. Well, he's not called a man after God's own heart because of his sin with Bathsheba. He's called a man after God's own heart because of an intention and a pursuit that in human terms sometimes has frailty. He's called a man after God's own heart because he refused to stay there. He refused to stay in his sin. He acknowledged his sin. That's a man after God's own heart. He refused to stay there. He refused to forgive that within himself before he had been forgiven by God, before he had repented, before he had gone in a different direction, that sort of thing. So we think about that. David is a character study of faith himself, and he writes, obviously, many of the Psalms. But I don't even mean the writer of so many of the Psalms as a study of the doctrine of faith. I mean the Psalms themselves. So if you missed last week, we were talking about providence, God's providence, what it means, working in our lives according to His will. We looked at a couple of things, truths related to the life of Joseph. Then we went to the 23rd Psalm and talking about the 23rd Psalm as showing faith through God's providence and evidential care. What I mean by evidential care is there's evidence for it. I took you to Psalm 18. We'll look at Psalm 18 and Psalm 19 here in sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I took you to Psalm 18 because it was fresh on my mind because it was the lesson from the previous Sunday. And so I wanted, or the previous Sunday, 2 Sundays earlier, I'll get right in a minute. Anyway, and we saw why David could say the things he said in Psalm 18. And the things he said were rooted in something. They were based in something. So when I say God's providence and evidential care is the phrase I chose to use, evidential care, I'm talking about there's evidence right there. And so he's writing this psalm as somebody who has seen something. He believes something, but he believes something based on something he has seen and experienced. And so, if you were in the auditorium a moment ago, Bill, in the devotional thought leading up to the invitation, was talking from James about faith and works. And we know the phrase from James, faith without works is dead, being alone. The doctrine of faith demands we might consider, and it's what you see in these great personal examples, whether it's David or Abraham or in the life of Joseph, that there's some hard work involved in the creation and the sustenance, the sustaining faith. Sustaining faith. This idea of I kind of lament this. This is just me now. I'm just kind of being really open when I say this. I have nothing against the artist, the singer. I have nothing against the singer. What a tremendous vocal talent she is. But it was a tremendous hit. One of her earliest hits from the country music singer Carrie Underwood was Jesus what? Take the wheel. And this idea that we say, let go and let God. Have you heard that phrase before? Got to learn to let go and let God. Depending on what you mean, I might agree with you, but I'm going to tell you it's really going to depend on what you mean. And I think how most of that is used, no, I'm not going to agree. I'm just not. It's sort of, that to me is sort of has been hijacked a little bit. That idea has kind of been extended. You know, a rubber band you take and you stretch it and it always comes back. But what happens if you keep stretching it? It'll eventually break. What else does it not do before it eventually breaks? It doesn't come back. It retains its shape. It doesn't come back. And there are some things where if you stretch it too far, it's hard for it to return to its original form, as in this case, as God intended. The idea that faith is something where you just go, God's got it. Well, God may have it, but while God has it, He has still expected His people to be about certain things while He has it. In fact, that's part of giving it to God. You give it under His terms. You give things to God under His terms. And when you look at the terms of faith, it's not just completely free of our tough choices. It's not completely free of our sacrifices. It's not completely free from difficulty. Faith can be hard. Sustaining faith can be hard. And so that's what I mean by Jesus take the wheel. I think that idea has to be taken on with great care. And so whether it's David in writing in the many Psalms or anybody else that we'll look at in this study, faith is the belief that there are some things I cannot do and only God can do. There's the promises of God that He will do, but it still involves those things He's asked me to be about while I'm waiting to see my faith worth it, while I'm waiting to see my faith come to fruition, as we say. And so David opened Psalm 23. I've got a question. By the way, I think last week we left off. Let's go back to these two passages. This is where time ran out, if I remember correctly. James 1:17. Somebody on my left hand here. James 1:17. Somebody over here, Matthew 6:11. And let's read those again.
Every good and perfect gift is from coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows.
We know this is part of faith. Everything I need for my sustenance, everything I need to be upheld in my faith, every good and perfect gift comes from the Father, comes down from the Father, and He's not shifty. You know where He is? You know the certainty of His call. You know the certainty of His love. You know the certainty of His power. There's no shifting shadow. There's no shadow. There is no shadow. We sing in the song, Great is Thy Faithfulness. There is no shadow of turning with Thee. Thou changest not. Thy compassions, they fail not. He will not fail. Okay? We're rooted in that. And the reason that's first, this is where the let go and let God principle may come in. we've got to be rooted first in an understanding of who God is, uh, that I can be assured of His love, what His desire is for me. We're certain of His power. We're certain of the end and the promises for His people. So yeah, we start with let God show Himself. Let Him show Himself to be true. Let go and let God. We're going to let Him show Himself be true. Hold your place right here because it just popped into my mind. Go to James 1. James 1. I was about to say James 2, but I think it's James 1, 2 through 4 is what I'm thinking about. Somebody read James 1, 2 through 4.
Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
Okay, let God let something happen. Say, I'm going to let go and let God, but you've got to let God let it happen. And so when God's trying to produce something in me, and He calls me to be about things that will produce things in me, see, that's letting God let it happen. God has the power to let it happen, but you've got to let God let it happen. If God says, Andy, if you'll walk in this direction, I'm going to let this be true in your life. Every good and perfect gift, all your sustenance, all your needs. If you'll walk this direction, and I say, well, I'd like to walk this direction, but you can still give it to me if you want to, you know. So James opens the whole book with the idea of letting God work, and you're doing that in faith because He calls for perseverance. Well, see, perseverance that's a choice. This is where our choices are involved in faith. Perseverance is a choice. And it's a choice that has to be made. I'm going to compare it to this. If you talk to an alcoholic and somebody that is not defensive about that, they are absolutely self-aware in that. Maybe it's been a long time. You'll hear something like this. It's a choice I have to get up and make every day. Right? Every day. Yesterday I was great. Yesterday I said no to a substance that I had previously abused and it had damaged my life. Yesterday I said no. Well, that doesn't help me today. Except to know that I can. If I made it yesterday, if I made it through yesterday, but I can make it through today. But I still have to do that today, you see. So James opens with the idea of letting God let something happen by perseverance. And part of faith is perseverance. And part of perseverance involves faith. Okay? Matthew 6:11. Give us this day our daily bread. It's today. We're talking about faith today. I think sometimes faith is looking at something way out in the distance. And is that important? Absolutely. Way out, because remember, we're just talking about perseverance. That means this may not come to fruition until, I don't know when that is. So yeah, it may be way out in the distance. But what about faith today? I'm choosing faith today. And this is what David one day gets up and writes. And if you divide out the 23rd Psalm, you're going to see that there's blessing, number one, and no pun intended, there's blessings and counting blessings. Can you see this in Psalm 23? He's going to say, this is what God has done and been for me. And just like he did in an earlier psalm, if you walk back just about 4 to 5 psalms, 5 psalms, you're going to get back to Psalm 18 that I mentioned a minute ago. And he's saying what he's saying because he has the experience to say, this is now on God's resume with me. And so he's, in Psalm 23, counting his blessings. There's blessing in counting your blessings. We don't fall into a regular remembrance. I want to say this as strongly as I know to say it. I'm never going to fall into a regular remembrance. There may be things that trigger remembrance. Times of the seasons that may trigger being with certain people. And so stories come to mind. Challenges come to mind. Things he and I went through a lot together. or something like that. We may have triggers, but I'm not going to be able to count my blessings falling into it. It's a purposed thing. And so count them off, roll them off, write them down. This is what David constantly does. And I think part of being a person after God's own heart is a person who chases that thing personally. In this case, he's chasing faith by remembering God's blessings. Now, why is that important? Why is it important for me to remember God's blessings to be faithful?
Because that gratitude expresses the sacrifice.
I'm reminded of sacrifice. I use this term a lot, and I probably always will because I'm trying to paint a picture in somebody's mind. Because we see it so often in the Psalms. David, more than any other writer of Scripture, not the only writer of Scripture, but more, I think, than any other writer of Scripture, Paul does this an awful lot in the New Testament, and others, obviously, gives God's resume in his life. He started way back, well before the Psalms. Can you think of maybe one of the first times you heard David do this? He rattled off something, all that God had done, and it was a reason he didn't need something else. He's before King Saul, right? Hey, I think you're crazy, young man, but you need to, put on my armor. I'm going to give you, you don't need to go out there. If you're going to be stupid, then at least put this on. And he says, I don't need that. And what's he start doing? He starts rattling off. Let me tell you what's happened in the past. Let me tell you what's happened already. And the idea is, I've seen God's hand. I've seen God work. Felt His protection. I'm still here to talk about it. The reason I think I can go out there is because I have no trouble believing He's going to take care of me. What's your basis of that? Well, when I came up against this, He did it. When I came up against. This is what I mean by constantly chasing more to put on the resume. Chase more and more to put on your God resume, because there's a time when you're going to need it more than you've ever needed it in the past. You don't know when that's going to be. You don't know what's going to be the reason it's going to be. So counting blessings help give us material to add to God's resume, because we're going to need it.
And an illustration of it. Even with his faith, he still picked up more than one rock. Mm-hmm. Put in the sling. Mm-hmm. He didn't just grab one and walk up there and throw one. He had a whole bag of stones.
Yep.
So I think that, not to look too into that, but it doesn't, just to your point though, our involvement on that as well. Mm-hmm. Like he had some backups just in case.
Yeah.
But the faith was still there that God would deliver him somehow, right? Mm-hmm. But he still went through the precautionary measures and brought more than one stone for that sling.
This is important. This is a really good observation, because what David believes is God's going to be the deliverer. What David has to believe is he's got to hang on and let God decide how much he's going to have to go through before the deliverance is shown. You see what I'm saying? God's not less of a deliverer if He makes me really go through something before He delivers me. God is not only a deliverer if it's easy. He delivers David, as we all know, from the giant. He delivers David and Davy. I'm really comfortable with David. I grew up in the youth group with one of my friends was David Wells, but everybody called him Davy. We grew up in church together, Davy Wells, and I don't know if that's how that came out or not, but anyway, Davy. You know what's going to happen? The next time I talk about David from the pulpit, it's going to come out. And a snippet of people in the room will laugh, snicker, because they had heard that before. He's going to deliver David. But the promise is not just walk out there. I won't make you feel anything. I won't make you question anything. I won't make you tremble at any period. I won't make you not ridiculed. I mean, he was ridiculed by Goliath. Goliath talked about how young he was and how small he was and so on and so on. And he said what he was going to do to him, right? I'm going to feed you to the birds, right? God is not less of a deliverer because it took a while. Less of a deliverer in my life because I had to hurt a little bit through it. Less of a that doesn't change. Just like God is not less gracious if He has some expectations for His people. I really lament the fact that there are people, and unfortunately I believe there have been people in the church, I'm not talking about in the world or in the religious world that's different than what we believe, maybe in churches of Christ, that there are people that make such a separation between grace and expectation. If it comes with expectation, it's not grace. That's not true. You want me to prove it? Go to Titus 2, chapter 11 and 12, and I can prove it. Titus 2, chapter 11, 12. Titus 2, 11 and 12. I think Davey wrote that. Titus 2, 11 and 12. And somebody start reading that, and I'm going to stop you at one point.
For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching
Stop. Wait a minute. All right, let's deal with the first part. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. Tell me it ain't so. That there's not a period there? There's not a period? Say it ain't so, Wes. Did you have a word after a comma? Or two words in a row after a comma, and what were they?
teaching us.
Grace came saying something? Is there more? What's after that?
Teaching us that, denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in the present age.
If God doesn't first choose to be gracious, nothing else matters. I know. We're not limiting the grace of God because it doesn't matter what kind of person I am. On the scale of things, by reputation, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in all the earth. He's blameless and upright, Job chapter 1. That's from God Himself speaking about Job. And had God not chosen to be gracious, Job would have gone to hell. See? Job's not saved because he's blameless and upright on the scale of things. Not first without God making it possible. Right? So, God is not less gracious if it came saying something. I lament this idea that, which is it? Are we saved by grace or are we... Well, wait a minute. Let's go to Ephesians 2, verse 8 and 9. By the way, back to Titus 2, 11 and 12. The grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching us to deny ungodliness. Okay? That's an expectation. That's a choice. That's a challenge, and that's sometimes difficult. To deny ungodliness and to live soberly, righteously in the present age. So, I want you to deny some things. I want you to live a certain way instead. Now go to Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. Somebody read that.
For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast.
Now, people like to jump on that. And if they want to jump on the aspect that we can't be saved by our works, I'll jump on their back and ride with them. Okay? I've never preached that I can be saved by works. Okay? But I will say, somebody says, what is it? Is it grace? Is it faith? Or is it works? Is it grace, faith, or obedience? And what do you think my answer is, by the way? Yes. That's my answer. And somebody goes, no. And they say, Ephesians 2, 8, 9, Ephesians 2, 8, 9. I know Ephesians 2, 8, 9. Okay. It is by grace you've been saved. Is there two words after that? just like before? Through faith. Oh, well, what's that? And there is no aspect, no part of the doctrine of faith that does not include choices. Faith without works is dead, being alone. And James says, can such a faith save him? No. So if I'm saved by grace through faith, and a dead faith cannot save me as a part of that equation, then that's where obedience comes in, and that's where tough choices come in. Well, David, in Psalm 23, he's going to count his blessings, but secondly, he's going to believe this, that his greatest pleasure is in being with the Lord. There's a song. Oh, come on, Andy. There's a hymn. All of its pleasures, pomp and its pride, give me but Jesus, my Lord crucified. Give me but Jesus, my Lord crucified. That's the end of a verse. Nearer, still nearer. That's it. Nearer, still nearer. And I don't remember what verse it is. Maybe somebody can look it up or Google it. It'll be on there. Find the verse for me. But one of those verses will say, toward the end of the verse, all of its pleasure. Talking about worldly, the allure of the world. All of its pleasure, pomp, and its pride. Give me only, give me but Jesus, meaning only Jesus. Give me Jesus instead of all that. I'll just take that. Even though the sizzle's over here, the jingle's over here, it's snazzy, but it doesn't pay off. David writes in Psalm 23 about the evidential, obvious that is, care of God. His faith is rooted in what God has already done, and he's confident that he's going to continue to do it. Now, why is he confident he's continuing to do it? Because of what he's done in the past. That's what a resume is. Somebody looks at a resume and they say, based on what you've got down that you have already done, that doesn't, it's not foolproof, but the message is, you can believe that I can do the job because of what I've done in the past. And it gives you confidence that at least compared to another candidate, I can do it because of what I've done in the past. That's David's confidence as well. So he's counting his blessings. He is stating that the greatest pleasure is in being with the Lord and that life is better when the Lord is his guide. Look in Psalm 23 at verse 2, 3, and 5. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. That's a comparative. Because there are some pastures David would have known, trust me, as a boy, where he was, when he was, in the area he was, David would have known there were some pastures that were not green. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. That's verse 2. There's comparative, because there are pastures that are not green and there are waters that are not still. Now, does that mean that I never find a pasture that's a little browned out in my life? That I never find waters that are a little choppy in my life? No. But this is the ultimate end of continuing with God. This is what David has found by continuing with God. Verse 3, he restores my soul. Well, why would my soul need to be restored, David? Well, maybe, go back to verse 2, maybe I was in a not-so-green pasture. Maybe I spent some time by some waters, in some waters that were a little choppy, a little dangerous in my life, a little threatening. He restores my soul. How? I stayed with him and I found my way back to green pasture. I stayed with him and I'm back by still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. It's not the only path. There's another path. He's going to take me on this path. And life is better when I've allowed the Lord to decide what path I take rather than anyone else or anything else. Skip down to verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the very presence of mine enemies and anoint my head with oil. Life is better when the Lord is God. Overall, in the 23rd Psalm, find this for me. Find me a verse that applies to each of these words. And I'm probably going to forget one of the words. I wrote down 3 or 4 words on a little Post-it note. And I meant to attach the Post-it note to this little paper, and I didn't. So it's on my desk somewhere. God is a God, in Psalm 23, God is a God of provision. Find me a verse that would say that.
5.
Okay? Read that for us.
You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup runneth over.
He's a God of presence. Find me that.
4.
Verse 4. What do we got?
Walking through the valley of the shadow of death. He's with us.
Yeah. I'll fear no evil, for you're right there. So we've got a God of provision. We've got a God of presence. Do we have a God of promise? Somewhere? Verse 6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow. By the way, surely. Does anybody have a word besides surely opening verse 6? Okay, surely. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, we say. Assurance. Surely. I'm assured. I can be assured. I believe you can be. Go ahead. Only. Only in this. By the way, one of my favorite hymns that we don't sing a ton is Only in Thee. Oh, and we wrap up each verse, I think, only, dear Lord, in Thee. Only in this, surely, and only, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. What's that based in? It's rooted in a promise. He's a God of promise. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It bothers me. Here's another, this is just me, okay? It bothers me. I don't mean I don't get it. Is that possible that you can get it and but still be bothered? You can understand it in human equation, but still be bothered. I hope that makes some sense, because otherwise I just don't make sense, and that may be true. But to hear Christians speak like this of their hope or of their salvation. And I'm talking about baptized believers. Okay, they've heard, right? They've believed. They've repented. They've confessed. They've been baptized. They're trying to continue then, understanding that's just a start, not the end, not the cherry on top. That starts the process or the life in Christ. They're trying to live a faithful life. All of that. And then are you going to heaven? And it's, I hope so. I sure hope so. Well, I hope so too. So it may be that all you mean by that is something that I might say or feel. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily sound like that because it comes out of people. I hope so. Like, can we get better than that? Because I just don't think that's God's desire for me. We're not talking about being cocky. We're not talking about sounding assured in ourselves, of ourselves, through ourselves. We're not talking about being cocky. But you can be humble and assured.
I was just going to say conviction. Speaking of conviction.
Yeah. So I don't know that. I don't like that. So I like the fact, and I don't want to sound like that. I know there could be a ditch on both sides of the road where I sort of almost sound like a once saved, always saved person. Okay? So if somebody wants to speak to the idea that they hope they can continue in what God has done for them, that they can continue in it, and that they hope that they will never falter, they hope they'll stay with it. Okay, I hope so. I hope I never forsake him. I hope I never turn my back. I hope, that sort of thing. No man after putting his hand to the plow looks back and is fit for the kingdom of God. Luke 9:62. If that's what they mean, okay. But in terms of status, when God says I'm somewhere, I'm there. When He says He put me somewhere, I'm there if I don't walk away. And I don't like the sound of sometimes God's people in the, I hope so. That doesn't sound like David either. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell. I will dwell. This is confident. He's not saying I've earned it. He's saying this is God's promise. God of provision, God of presence, God of promise. And I had another P, and that's the one I can't think of, and it's going to kill me. I'll sit straight up in bed at 1:30 this coming morning, and Jen will be like, what? Because I've yelled out the word. Anyway, I promise I'm not going to call or text y'all at 2 a.m. I got it! Yeah, I wanted to tell you this so you'd sleep well the rest of the night. I was sleeping fine, Andy, that sort of thing. But maybe next Wednesday I'll have it in my mind. But it was another P word. I like that, David. Perseverance. Let's go with it. Whether that's my fourth word or that would have been just even better, a fifth. It may have been. Anyway, it was good this afternoon. So there's another one. Maybe that's what I had. So David is writing out of a position of assurance. David is writing out of a position of faith that is rooted in something. It's rooted in what God has done for him thus far, where He has taken him, what He has found to be so.
There is belief, not questioning.
Yeah. By the way, does anybody have in verse 4? I know a lot of you are going to have yea, and some others are going to have even, probably, even though. Yea, though, even if. Does anybody have anything else? I want to tell you what I believe about this phrase here. I'm going to tell you, I did not look it up, okay? I didn't look it up in the Hebrew, so I may be wrong. But it just came to me. Otherwise, if it had come earlier, I'd have looked it up. I'll tell you what I believe about the opening of verse 4. Yea, though, even though, I think it's fair to say even when. I bet that if I look this up in the Hebrew, the idea here is, and especially if I look at the whole verse, or at least the first half of the verse, that I'm going to see the idea here in its setting and in its context is not in the rare, in the unlikely event that but no, when. When I walk through the very valley of the very shadow of death, okay, I will fear no evil. I think it would be fair off the top to, I think the context is there. It's though I understand this is a very poetic style of writing. The Psalms, start to finish, are poetic. I'll say more about that as we get to Psalm 1 and 2. Poetic style of writing. I think when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm going to make a choice. It may not be what I feel. I will fear. By the way, when Scripture says things like, I will not fear, I will, you see this a lot in the Psalms, but you see it in other places too, and somebody makes this, I will not, and somebody goes, how can you say that? How can you write that? How do you know you won't feel afraid? Well, he's not saying I'm not going to feel something. When he says I will not fear, that means I'm not going to stay there. I'm not going to let it control or guide or make a decision for me. It's not that God zaps us with an inability to feel doubt and fear. When he writes like this, he's saying, I'm going to choose not to fear. When fear comes, I'm going to choose not to let that debilitate and decide and derail and deflate me? I'm going to say no. I think it's kin to when Jesus was in the garden. There's a little article in the Greek language. What shall I say? He's praying, sweat drops of blood, and he says, "What shall I say, Father? Save me from this hour." He comes back with no. Instead of "Thy will be done." There's a little article in the Greek, and I forget what the article is, but part of speech, where he's literally in the original text, he shoves it away. He makes a statement of shoving it away. What I say, save me from this hour? No. He says that. Well, it's the same thing right here. When we interpret language like what we have in verse 4. Yea, though I walk through even though I will fear no evil, is a decision no. It's not that I don't feel it coming on. It's no. I'm going to say no to that. God's not going to zap me with an inability to fear. Because, by the way, tell me this. If God zaps us with an inability to feel fear, to feel sorrow, pick an emotion. If He zaps us, we come out of the water, you will no longer be capable of feeling fear. You will no longer be capable of congratulations. It's like somebody's giving you a package at Disney and it comes with all these things. Like, oh, great. No more fear, no more doubt, no more tears, no more in this life, no more all that kind of stuff. No. Because if so, what's faith? What's faith? Where's the faith in the incapability of feeling fear, feeling sorrow, feeling anger, where's the faith in that? That doesn't take faith. See? Faith is what's coming, what I'm choosing, and what's sometimes difficult, but I'm choosing even when. And so he comes out with that kind of statement in verse 4. Well, your thoughts if you've got them, and otherwise, I looked at the clock a few minutes. I am still not right with 6:30. I am on a 7 to 8 mentality when we get in here, and so I look up and it's 7:20, and I'm like, oh, got plenty of time. Oh yeah. Okay, go over to Psalm 1 and 2. I'm going to show you something or go back to Psalm 1 and 2. Because this is where we'll be next week. We're going to do both Psalms next week. We're going to time together. And then probably the following week I may do Psalm 8. I'm thinking about Psalm 8. Oh, that's right. That's correct. This is a shortened. So anyway, at some point, a couple of weeks down the road, we're back in here. The next 2 Wednesdays, by the way, we're in the auditorium. Does everybody, if you didn't know that, that's the case. All right, so we're going to go to Psalm 1 and 2. And I'm going to suggest to you the following things, and we'll come back to it. I'm going to Psalm 1 and 2 for a reason. The way Psalms opens, with the opening chapters, to me it's like the opening scene of a movie. Now, if you're like me and a lot of people probably, you may be maybe like most people. Do you hate, let's say you're going to a movie theater. Okay, so you don't have a remote control to rewind. This isn't a movie at home, okay? Do you hate to miss the opening part of a movie? I don't mean the ads. I mean the opening part when the movie actually starts. What's the problem with that? It's because, you come in 10 minutes late to the movie, now you're 20 or 30 minutes in and something's happening and I don't know what that means because you don't even know who the main character is. You don't know why is that significant. You don't know, and you don't really interrupt the movie and start asking people next to you, in front or behind, hey, what is that? Hey, who is that guy? That kind of thing. I need to be there at the start so I know basic important things about this movie to understand it. Well, Psalm 1 and 2 open a huge book for us. Psalm 1 and 2 open open it in such a manner that we can understand a major theme of the whole book of Psalms. That's my point. Psalm 1 and 2, we had to do this so that we can understand a major. I told you, we're not going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we don't have time for that. We don't have that many weeks in Psalms. We'd be here for 2.5 years, literally. But Psalm 1 and 2 is like the opening scene of a movie in terms of understanding the basics and the theme. So we'll do that. So read Psalm 1 and 2, and we'll be back in here in a couple of weeks. That's where we'll go next. And if you don't have any thoughts, that's that.